Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. Today, we are presenting Schools in a Time of Crisis. We're Not Disrupted Enough with Will Richardson. My name is Lori Burris, and I'm the Education Innovation Advisor at LinkedIn Learning, the leading provider of learning online videos, and I'll be moderating this session. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Don't worry, we'll be sending out an on-demand recording of this webinar as soon as it's available. Any presentation decks or any additional materials will be sent to you as well. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question and answer box in your Zoom control panel. We'll bring them up during the presentation, and we will also have time for questions at the end. We really encourage social sharing with your audience, and you can use hashtag HEDleaders. And also we encourage you to put your ideas and thoughts and reactions down in chat. And for those of you just joining us for the first time, welcome, and know that we love hearing from you. So today the format for the interview is a conversation followed by questions. And so now, without further ado, I want you to hear from Will Richardson. Will, would you take a moment to briefly share a little bit about who you are, where you've been, where you're going, and your various roles in education?
Well, first, Lori, thanks for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity. So I am a former public school educator of 22 years. I was a high school English teacher and also an administrator who oversaw technology and integration in the classroom. But I left that about 15, 16 years ago now, maybe 17, time flies. And in that time, I have been writing and working with schools and educators around the world to try to make some sense of this moment that we're in terms of what's changing in the world, what the implications are for education in schools. And certainly this last 16 months has been just a real roller coaster ride, an accelerated roller coaster ride in terms of those conversations. I think we're at a pretty interesting hinge moment here in not just the path forward for schools, but also many parts of our world and the way we live in it. So the other things that kind of inform my work is that I'm the owner of two children. I have two young adults, one who's still in college, and so I've been observing their school careers for a total of more than 2 decades now, and that's been really interesting, and I've learned a lot from that. And then the other piece of it is I happen to be one of the early bloggers in the education space. So I started my blog back in 2000. And so for 21 years, I've been writing online, participating online in communities and using social media. And that's given me a lens as well for the ways that people connect and create and communicate and learn today. So those three intersections are really where the kind of the frame of my work are right now.
Well, I first heard about you, Will, through Linda Wyman when I first started at lynda.com, now LinkedIn Learning. And I've been following you ever since because of your broad experience and broad interest and passion for this. And he was very modest. I did list on this slide the 6 books that he's written. And not many of us can say we've written 6 books, and they're all available. And I'll talk more about the Big Question Institute towards the end. So when the whole world came to a halt in mid-March 2020, this critical moment offered an opportunity to reflect on the experiences, purpose, and practice of school. It also demands that we chart a viable, vibrant path to the future for all learners. Visionary educators recognize that the new story of school will be written collectively in authentic collaboration with peers from around the world. They also know that the complex challenges confronting us require fresh ways of problem solving and planning. So will you say that leading with fearless inquiry is about facing these difficult questions? Can you explain to us what you mean by fearless inquiry, and how do we get started doing it?
Well, I think it kind of harkens back to a lot of the work that Ron Heifetz has been doing in terms of looking at change and separating it out as technical change and adaptive change. And I think the fearless inquiry comes with the adaptive change, where the change is about who we are as people, as educators, our systems, our schools, what our purpose and mission are. And what we really think, my colleague Homa Tavangar and I at the Big Questions Institute really think is that we have to begin to interrogate some of the fundamental aspects of our work before we can plan or plot a path forward through what I think everyone agrees is an increasingly uncertain future. And that takes some courage. It really takes some courage to ask, why do we do the things that we do that make no common sense when it comes to what we know about learning? Because there are lots of parts of our systems and our practices that don't make any common sense. We have to be willing to go there and put those on the table and say, well, is there something else we should be doing, or should we leave these things behind? I think we have to really take a look at what our roles are in classrooms. I mean, we live in a world now where, knowledge and information and teachers and technologies are accessible through the things that we carry in our pockets. It gives us agency to learn in ways that didn't exist even 5 or 10 years ago. It changes the nature of what we need to be doing as the adults in classrooms. So anyway, they're kind of those existential questions that are hard to ask and scary because the answers may compel us to change, again, our value systems, the way we act, and the way that we share power and all of those things in schools. And they may also require us to think differently about what our mission and what our purpose is in the world. It's hard to do that, and it's especially hard to do that in the middle of a pandemic, by the way.
Change is really hard for people. I mean, people often stay in very bad circumstances because of that fear of change, because it's basically the fear of unknown, thinking that what they might get into will be worse than what they're in already. But it does bring to mind that we did learn some things about ourselves, in less than 2 weeks. I would say almost 90% of all classes in the United States were put online in a system that has always said we do things slowly. So it was interesting to see, going back to your idea of adaptive, when forced the hand, schools were able to act rather rapidly, more than I would have ever dreamed of. I want to take a moment to also bring in the audience. There's some interesting things that Will has noted, if you read his blogs and follow him, about what are some of the things we have really valued during the pandemic. There have been some good things. So we want to hear your thoughts and feelings. So take a moment right now in the chat to write the word down value, and then write down some of the first things that come to your mind that you really valued during the pandemic. One of the ones that came to my mind was the value of relationships, that they had took on a whole new meeting when you had to do them through Zoom and had to do them not face to face. So I'll just give you a few moments to do that. And then Anna, when you see a few in the chat, if you could just respond to Will and I and tell us what people are writing down.
Yes, we're seeing a few responses come in. These include teacher self-care, family time, the ability to collaborate with others in Zoom, showing up as humans first, opportunities to experiment while understanding that short-term failures were going to be part of our overall learning process, health and family, working from home, and flexibility.
Will,
any you'd like to add to that list? That was a pretty good list from our audience.
Yeah, well, I absolutely think that the self-care comment and that not just for we as educators, but for kids, for all of us right now is paramount. In our work, we've been doing a lot of that with faculty from around the world, and they are exhausted, they are emotional, they are spent. And I think as much as we need to just get away from all of this for a while and recharge, I also think we need to process it, right? And I think that the conversations that we can have right now are crucial with just letting people talk about what they've learned, what they've experienced, the emotions that they've been through. We need to kind of come together as school communities and just talk about the last 16 months. And it's not just the pandemic. It's the social and racial justice issues that have been surfaced. It's the inequity issues that have been surfaced, and many other things that are constantly kind of challenging us in this moment. So to me, that's got to be the number one priority. But I want to really fast go back to what you said, Lori, about that 2-week period where we went from
Yeah.
face-to-face school to online school. I think that was even more of a technical change, though, because what I've seen is that many schools tried to take what they did in face-to-face and just funnel it through the technology, and that not really a lot changed in terms of how they taught the curriculum, how they interacted with students, the grading procedures, processes, and all of those types of things. But what's been interesting, though, is that when you talk to people who have gone through not just that 2-week period, but this whole 16-month period, when you talk to like educational leaders who have been dealing with these challenges and these problems, what they will readily tell you is that it's been some of the most profound learning they've ever done in their lives. They are problem solving, not just week to week or day to day, but minute to minute, literally, in some of the things that just pop up. They have to come up with a solution. They're working collaboratively. It's all real world. It's in their, it's in the moment. And what's always interesting is when we then have conversations about how learning has looked in these kinds of online classrooms and in physical space classrooms. And the reality of it is, and they will admit this, their learning that they've done doesn't look anything like the learning that kids are doing in these spaces. Kids are still pretty much following a curriculum, not doing much problem solving, not invested with too much agency to pursue the things that are really mattering to them in the moment. So I don't want to, when the subtitle is we're not disrupted enough, that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? We're certainly
No, I get
disrupted.
it.
We're certainly disrupted in a technological sense, and our lives have been thrown into chaos and whatever else. But the fundamentals of what we do with children in the school setting, whether it's remote or whether it's in person, really haven't changed that much. And they really need to now, I think. And that's the urgency.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I as a teacher who teaching 2 college classes this past year, completely rewrote my classes. And I know that many good teachers did, especially because, as you said, the switch went on, but not all of us felt prepared. And we also had in our backpack kind of knowing we had already met the students before we went online. To go from sort of knowing your students to not knowing them at all was I thought was the biggest hard hurdle to get over.
Yeah.
How to establish community in an online situation. So I'm going to go to the next question, which is getting kind of to this idea of the disruption, because if we want to look at disruption, we kind of have to look at what we'd like to change. What are some things we have really devalued during the pandemic? So go ahead and write the word devalue in chat, and then kind of write down the first thing that came to mind. One of the things that came to mind was that it didn't matter if you took the SAT or ACT. Testing didn't matter as much. Grades didn't matter as much. Those were a couple of things that I saw. It was experiences mattered, and these other things that we had kind of used as measurements of success kind of disappeared all of a sudden. So Anna, when you see a few, if you could report back.
Let's see. We had a response given: paperwork, traditional FTF professional development,
Anything you'd like to add, Will, to the devaluing thing?
Well, I think that we've been, one of the questions that we use in our work is we ask people what's sacred, right? And the interesting responses are always that relationships, community, caring, all of those things are what's really sacred about what's happening, what needs to happen in schools. And then we, make the comment, if it didn't end up on your sacred list, then it's on the table for, for really thinking about whether you want to continue to do it. So, SAT and ACT and AP and IB and all those acronyms and letters, all of those were pushed, obviously, in the last 16 months. And we found we could live without them. What a concept.
Exactly.
And we also found that we could live with, in some schools, a pretty serious cut in the curriculum. Some schools tried to keep delivering it all and probably didn't do a great job either in a learning sense or in a health sense by doing that. But a lot of schools just said, yeah, you know what, let's just get to the really core stuff and let's just leave it at that. And let's not overload kids with homework, and let's not overload them with all this other stress that, in some cases we usually do. So, I mean, I think that in various places we found that there's a lot about the school experience that we could leave behind if we chose to do that. If we chose to do that, right? And I think a lot of people want to get back to normal. They want to feel that consistency or that sense of, you know, this is how it feels. This is what I used to do, and it's just more comfortable that way. Obviously, I'm not an advocate for that. I think that we should be abnormal actually right now in our thinking about how to go about schools moving forward, and that requires devaluing, or at least having conversations about devaluing a lot of things that we do, again, that don't make a lot of common sense in a learning context.
Yeah, I realized when I was teaching online that I could teach less. I'd always been in my mind, what I thought is that I was the mother bird and I needed to jam as much food down those baby birds' throats as possible. And I realized that during this pandemic that technique wasn't going to serve anybody. It wasn't going to make my baby albatrosses be able to fly at the end of the semester. So I taught less subject, but I was very critical in curating what I taught. And I actually spent 2 weeks of class time doing one-on-ones with students individually, because
Right.
I felt that that was one of the things they were super, super missing, feeling really connected to a teacher, a guide, a mentor. And um, got and it got amazing results by doing it. And when I shared with other teachers that I spent 2 weeks of a 15-week class doing one-on-ones, they go, "Well, what did you do?" I said, "I cut out a lot of crap and
Exactly.
and just
Exactly.
made time to be with the people,
Yeah.
to to
Right.
check in, to see where I could help them. Sometimes it was just helping them get a
Yeah.
loaner computer. Sometimes it was other issues, but believe it or not, it was a lot of different issues. As what you were saying before, it wasn't one issue about learning. I
Right.
found that they were all engaged learners, but that they had a lot of hurdles to meet.
Yeah.
So the difficult question that you pose is, what do we want our schools to be in the future? Do you have an idea about that yourself?
I'm laughing at that picture.
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
well, so let me just, as a disclaimer, because some people, after they listen to me talk or read my stuff, think, oh, he just wants to get rid of schools. Yeah, that's not what I want to do. I think schools can be powerful places of learning. I think that when adults, caring adults, get together with interesting kids, and nurture them and raise them to greater heights that they could go to on their own. I think that's the potential of schools, and that they play such a huge role in the community, and let's be honest, in society as well, right? We saw the disruption that happened when we went to remote schooling, and kind of all the way the world works was kind of put on its edge, because now schools were different. So schools aren't going away, and I don't want them to go away. But I think it's a great question. What do we want them to be? And I think that what we want them to be are places where really deep and powerful learning happen, and where kids are doing real world work that matters to them. And that's just not the case in most schools right now, if we're being honest about it. The kids are, our children are facing lots of problems. Let's be honest about it. They are facing lots of challenges. And this is not going to be the last immediate challenge that they face. It probably won't be the last ones that we face either. And just like this particular moment, they're going to have to learn their way through it. They're going to have the skills, the literacies, and the dispositions to continually problem solve, continually collaborate, continually find their own classrooms, their own resources, their own knowledge sources, all of that. That's what we should be preparing them for. And we do that by giving them opportunities to do that work, to pursue learning on their own terms in classrooms as well. And, I want to go back to a comment that Liza put in the chat, where she said, would you agree that we need to reclaim the notion of learning to encompass what goes on within the learner, way beyond what the school or teachers intends to teach? Absolutely. And one of the problems that we have is that we really don't have a shared definition of learning in schools. It's been fascinating to go to lots of places and ask that question of lots of people. Go into almost any school and ask 10 different people, how do you define learning? You'll get 10 different answers. And that's not a great reality. We need coherence right now when it comes to how we think about what learning is. And if we really go there, if we really just step into what is learning, And we kind of interrogate our own learning, what's required for us to learn. I think what we find is that it requires experience. It's Piaget, right? Learning is a consequence, knowledge is a consequence of experience. And so we need to experience the world with kids in classrooms. We need to make it more real. We need to give them opportunities to not only work in the world, but learn with the world, because they're going to be doing that the rest of their lives. So
go elucidate. I know you talk about this all the time, that false notion that learning happens when it doesn't look like real life. Explain further. Like, how do we make it real?
Well,
like, what is
by giving kids opportunities to do projects that really matter to them, by giving them the agency to say, I want to try this, and we say yes. By saying yes a lot more to when kids ask us, that they want to do this over here, or read this particular book, or whatever else. I think we lift them up in terms of giving them the opportunities that they're asking for, to continue to do that. But here's the great test that not a lot of schools are willing to take on. But if you're defining learning by the grade that appears on the final exam, let's say, or some type of similar thing, then go ask those kids 6 months hence those same questions that they took on the final exam. And you'll find out really fast that really wasn't learning. Most of that stuff is just discarded. It's not real learning. It doesn't stick. And the reason is because it's not a part of their experience. It's not relevant to them. They're not using it. They don't see value in it. They see the value only in learning it because they want to get that particular grade to get through that particular class and move on to the next class in order to get to some outcome that they're pursuing in a school sense. But learning is this very natural thing that we do almost, from the moment we're born to the moment we die. And schools are, if we're honest about it, this very unnatural place where we have these systems and these constructs that at the end of the day don't create the same conditions that learning happens in real life. So schools of the future, hopefully, will try to replicate more of the conditions that we all need. The need for relevance and passion and agency and time and focus and all of those things that we require on our own. Those are the conditions that we should be much more focused on in creating in schools moving forward, instead of kids sitting in rows, grouped by age, siloed out by topics, motivated by grades. Those are not things that people say are great conditions for learning if you ask them that. And why we continue to do that is a real problem.
Well, you really had an impact on me this spring in my class at Otis School of Art and Design. I was teaching a senior seminar, and I didn't call anything assignments. I said, you're going to have 6 to 8 experiences. I really think it doesn't matter whether you get an A. I said, I want you to drop thinking about getting an A, B, or C. I'm really looking to see how you experience these activities. And I can guarantee you, if you do all of these experiences, you're bound to get an A or a B just right off the bat, just by just reflecting and sharing back to the class. Those will be the 2 academic things, is that you reflect in writing and you share
Right.
back to the class. And I had 100% by changing the vocabulary and not calling them assignments.
And let me just say really fast too. I mean, I'll be a little self-promotive here, but tomorrow actually we're running 2 free webinars on ungrading, right? And we've had 1,500 people sign up for those webinars.
Wow.
And so that tells you something, right? It tells you that people are really interested in trying to figure out a different path, right? How do we do this differently? Which is great. And if there's one, hopefully positive, hopefully there's more than one, but one positive outcome of the pandemic is that it has forced us to challenge a lot of these things that we, really haven't interrogated in the past. And now people are going, why are we continuing to do this? How can we stop doing some of these things? So I think that's great. I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, so I think it's a good point now to summarize just some of the things for you. You've said deep engagement in meaningful real world problem solving, driven by questions, collaboration, I want to get back to that one, productive challenges, things where we make things happen, and unconstrained curriculum. It's not limited by parentheses.
Right.
So collaboration is one of my biggest beefs and one of students' biggest beefs because, and it's one of employers' biggest beefs. If I talk to many employers who are hiring college graduates, they say to me, they don't know how to collaborate. They don't know how to be on a
Right.
team. And yet all the time I hear teachers saying, oh, I do collaborative projects. And I always say what they've done is they've put out a pie and had the students divided into 4 parts. Each person eats their part and puts it back together again. Really, some of these things are hard to do, Will. Can you, I mean, like collaboration, how to be effective in teaching and learning with that?
Well, I mean, that requires a change of our stance as educators, right? It's not about our pie, right? It's about their pie. It's about, what, again, kids, I've seen amazing projects where kids have gotten together to design skate parks in their local communities, for instance. I could rattle off tons of these, right? But that's because they wanted to do that. A teacher didn't come to them and say, okay, we're going to make a skate park project and you 4 are working together. And so you go over there and figure out, no, that's not, we have to change our stance. We have to say, we're opening this classroom to what your interests and your questions are. And I'm here to support that and to maybe nudge you and push you and maybe throw a little roadblock in your way from time to time to get you thinking harder about it. But basically, if there are people who want to come together to work on that project, then let's do that, right? We have to have some shared interest or,
Yeah, I love that because you're getting back to about, well, key is, does it matter? That's motivation, right? Does it mean something? That's purpose. And so like that skateboard park. I
right,
mean, they have to identify a problem. They have to
right.
figure out what resources are
A
available
lot of
or not
math, a
available.
lot of
They have
math,
to
right?
they have to figure out what each person's biggest contribution can be on the team. Maybe
Right.
has the expertise in skateboarding, but somebody else has a dad who's an architect. Who knows? Somebody else knows how to build things. But it's all of a sudden really understanding your team resources in terms of what they can bring. I
And
find
I
so
would, but
few teamwork projects do take the time to do some of these things.
I would say too, there's a kind of nuanced but important distinction between collaboration and cooperation. And I think in this environment, actually, we have to almost be better at cooperation necessarily than collaboration, because we have to be able to cooperate with just about everybody right now, right? I mean, no matter what that is, we have to be able to engage in conversations, debates. We can be helpful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we dive in fully into every project, everything that comes across our desks. Those things that are collaborative are where there's really shared passion around that. But I may have resources that you need, Lori. We may not have to collaborate on something, but I'd be more than happy to cooperate by sharing my resources with you, by pointing you to maybe some mentors or people I know in the network. That's not collaborative necessarily, but we're helping one another out. And I think that that's a skill as well that we have to begin to develop, not just inside classrooms, but globally, right? Because we're living through this medium right now. And so how we do that with people we don't know is really important.
Which is teaching people how to observe each other's skills and strengths and
Yeah,
teaching people how
no
to
doubt.
trust each other, and then how to go and ask for help. I mean,
That's right.
believe it or
Exactly.
not, many students in team projects come to me and say, can I do it on my own? They just want
Yeah,
to disband the entire classroom and go
sure.
back to it's just me and you. And, rarely I can say, rarely am I in a position where I get to hire or fire someone or compose the whole team alone. I mean, I
Right.
really get that choice. So it's interesting that in school, that's common that students choose to do something completely independently without, I mean, we actually foster a lot of that very
Right.
individual process. So another question that I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the most important future skills that our students need?
Well, I think there is one most important skill, and I think that is, I'm not sure exactly what the term is these days because it's getting bigger and bigger by the day, but it is something around information literacy in terms of how do you navigate a post-fact world, which is kind of what we're entering right now. When you have people saying, well, my truth is different from your truth, or my fact is, how we are able to figure out what's really real and how we engage in kind of that information the ways in which we verify and vet information and people and technologies and all of that, I think is going to be crucial. Do we understand how algorithms are kind of running our lives in many ways? Do we understand the privacy and surveillance issues that are inherent in our use of this technology? Can we create and share and communicate in appropriate and meaningful and powerful ways online? I think, it's all of a piece, and that's why I don't know what the name of that bucket is, but it is this idea, I think, that if we can't come to some literacy around what we're reading, who we're talking to, who we're working with, if we can't agree on fact, then I'm not sure we're going to be around much longer as a species, to be honest with you. And I do think it's existential that we figure out a way that people can have those skills and dispositions to really get into and behind the information that they're seeing and the people that they're meeting.
I think you're right about it. I have a really good educator colleague named Lisa Gustinelli, who says we've got to get kids from digital poverty to digital affluence. And I think that what you're talking about is sort of the key to that. We've seen a lot of digital poverty, lack of access to broadband, lack of access to devices, no childcare support. There's just so many issues I could talk about where we could talk about that. But that gets me to the next thing, which is how do we make our stories work? Let's talk about storytelling and its role and impact in education. You've written and thought a lot about story, and I'd like you to share some of your ideas. I think storytelling is maybe one of the ways we move through our ideological divides and are better able to listen and experience others. How do you see story working?
Well, I think we think that this moment is a perfect moment to do a little bit of a reset and maybe an audit, if you will, on a lot of our practices and a lot of our systems. And one of the audits that we encourage is the story audit, and to really step back and ask, what stories are we telling, whether we know we're telling them or not, which of them are explicit, which of them are implicit. What are the symbols around our schools that people read into in terms of a narrative or a story? Everything we do tells a story. And that's from every email we send out to the community, to every poster we hang in the walls, to every jumbotron that we build on the football field. That all tells a story. It tells a story of what we think is important and what we think is the direction or the mission that we want to pursue. I think that we're telling a lot of conflicting stories. We say that we want this particular type of learning to happen, but the stories we tell are about merit scholars and about, AP scores and about all those other things. That's a story. That's a really powerful story, but it's not one that I think is one that's going to help our kids in the future in this kind of more complex world. So how do you change the story? That's the question. How do you begin to tell different stories? And we just really believe that if you have an aspirational vision for the future, that's already probably living somewhere in your school community, right? That almost every school has some classroom, some program that's kind of on that edge. And that the more then we begin to tell those stories and the choices that we make about the stories that we tell, that then builds capacity of people in the community to understand this different kind of vision for learning, to understand why it's important. And I think we also have to build capacity in our communities to help understand how the larger stories of education are beginning to change as well, right? The larger arc and narrative of education is absolutely moving away from this traditional, K through 12 high school, college, work pathway. And there are lots of different pathways opening up. We need to tell those stories if we want people to understand why we're beginning to think differently about what the classroom looks like. So story is really powerful. And the more we can get kids to tell those stories, the better, right?
Well, and it's super powerful. I mean, you're going to be telling stories your whole life. I work at LinkedIn, which is always helping people get hired. We care a lot that people make it go from school to work. And we know that there's 3 stories that really matter: where you've been, what you do and where you hope or aspirationally want to go. And if you can
Right.
say that story in 3 to 5 sentences on your LinkedIn profile, you're 10 times more likely to get hired and to get job interviews. That's just
Right.
the data. So this storytelling thing is really important. I also think it's important for our students to not have shame about stories. You know, there were certain things when I grew up that I was embarrassed to express. I think our stories should be things that we can use to say, lessons learned, how it's made me, the drives it's created. You know, yes, my family practices this, but I'm all about this. I mean, those are hard conversations to have. And if anything, I've learned from all the diversity and inclusion belonging training, and I've been through 8 of them this year, working for 3 schools and 1 company, is that we need to have a lot more awkward conversations,
Yeah.
and those conversations are stories. um, uh, Tell us, you have a term that I like, and I'm going to go share the screen again, but you talk about an infodemic, which I love. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Well, that kind of goes back to that literacy question, right? In terms of how do we manage all of this? This isn't my term, by the way. Other people have been using this, and it's becoming a little bit more, you'll see it a little bit more often. But it's just this idea that you know, back when I was a kid, we had 3 channels, you know that story, right? And now it's like we can get information from 5 billion people around the world through millions of different apps and technologies that come at us unfiltered, unedited. And it is, this was actually a term that was coined, I think it was the Secretary General of the UN talking about the pandemic being amplified by the infodemic, because there was so much misinformation and fake news and whatever else out there that people were and still are consuming, by the way. So it's a huge problem right now. And again, it goes back to those developing those literacies and those skills to parse what it is that you're seeing, who those people are, what their agendas are, and being a very discerning consumer of information. And it's extremely hard to kind of backfill that, to be honest with you. But I don't know what choice we have.
So this is where I'm going to kind of switch gears and talk about some of the processes that you've developed to help educators move through some of this. And one of the things that you say is the antidote to infodemics is building communities of trust. And that starts with these questions: what is, what if? And you've designed a series of questions for moving schools from asking what is to asking what if. And it starts by measuring what's changed, getting us back to your point that we're not disrupted enough. You created these 9 questions. Measuring is what's changed, 9 questions to ask yourself. You can get these on his website. I'll talk more about that. They're easy to download. We don't have time to answer all of these questions today, but if we were looking at the first one, aside from the venue of through which school is happening, how else has the our overarching narrative truly shifted? Do you think there's been some real shifts that will stay with us?
I wish I was more optimistic. I'll tell you where I've seen the most change happen is on the edges, where people are creating new schools from scratch for the aspirational visions that I think we're all kind of talking about here, right? That they are much more project-based, inquiry-based, agency-filled spaces that are allowing kids to explore the world around, again, the things that are of interest to them, with the school then kind of filling in the gaps in terms of the needs for literacy and, you know, writing and communicating and math and those types of things. But it's the curriculum doesn't necessarily come first. It comes as a strategy to help kids in the moment that they need that piece of curriculum. So there's some exciting new models of schools that are popping up all over the place. Traditional schools changing in those ways, though, is excruciatingly difficult. It's very, very hard to do because of all the reasons that, you know, I'm sure, you know, we could talk about in 30 seconds. We could list 40 things of why it's hard. But, you know, having said that, there are small pieces that at least are beginning to shift. Like, I think Genius Hour is a great idea, right? I think that if you can even give kids 1 hour a week to pursue a passion project, that's better than 0 hours a week. The problem I have with Genius Hour, though, is that I'll go and talk to teachers who are doing it, and they will say, "Oh my God, it's amazing. You should see what these kids created. I've never seen anything like that." And I always walk away wondering, well, if it's so great, why don't we have curriculum hour and make the rest of it genius, right? I mean, I think that should be the pursuit if kids are doing such great work. So anyway, there are small pieces that are beginning to change. And I think, as evidenced again by how many people want to know about ungrading, there's more momentum now around these conversations. I think the pandemic has accelerated that too. But it's the overarching narrative for traditional schools has not shifted in practice very much yet, although I think there are bigger conversations that are happening now, which is a good start.
I would agree. I don't think it's happening universally at universities and colleges, but I am seeing, for instance, at Art Center, they decided that they wanted to be, they knew they were one of the best design schools face to face, and they decided to have weekly meetings all throughout last summer about what were going to be the best practices. And they would have a teacher that had a best practice during the pandemic share it. And they were attended by 50 to 60 faculty in a school that normally a faculty meeting is where you have wine and dinner and you talk about what your schedule is. So it was really interesting to see that shift from not talking about budget and space and who's got a tenure to talking about teaching and learning. And then at USC, they ran a cohort during the summer as well, where we're all great expertises, probably some Nobel Prize winners as well, but all wanting to be better teachers. And that I'm seeing across all the universities that I'm working with through LinkedIn, is that there's these cohorts or community of practices developing where people are now trying to help each other be better educators.
Right.
And that, I can tell you, having been in education for 30 years, a faculty meeting was not about being a better educator. As again, it was about budgets,
Right.
tenure, and space. To realize our potential, you point out that we need what Aristotle called real goods. I had never heard this term. Could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that and what they are and how it can help us?
Well, I mean, I think it kind of aligns with Maslow. I mean, there are certain conditions that need to be present for us to learn deeply and powerfully. We have to feel safe. We have to feel trusted, respected. We have to be well fed. We have to have shelter. All of those things, right? They are preconditions for anything that we try to do in classrooms. And that's again why I think that right now, in this particular historic moment in which we're living, that it's so important that we really tend to the social emotional needs of both teachers and students right now. Learning does not happen if you are exhausted, or if you are emotionally spent, or if you are fearful, or whatever else. And we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to place a lot more emphasis, I think, that we have in the past, even though we've been kind of on a track upward, in terms of SEL, conditions in schools for quite some time now. I think, again, this has accelerated it. And it is this idea that, we really need to have the conditions around us to learn deeply, and to figure out and to articulate and then begin to live those conditions. So, I mean, I think most of this, again, is kind of common sense. I mean, Aristotle and Maslow are brilliant people, obviously, but what they're saying, people kind of read it and they kind of go, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's not rocket science. We have to do that, but we don't attend to those things as much as maybe we need to. So
Yeah,
I think yeah.
I attend a lot of presidents and chancellors meetings to see what's on their top 10 list, and it'll make you happy, Will, that well-being is number 1 right now.
Yeah,
it was number
good.
3. It's usually down around 10 or 15, to let you know, and it's moved up in the top 5 at almost every university or college in the country, whether it's private or public. I know you've been working regularly with a group of 40 to 50 educators across the globe as the pandemic has evolved, and that in fact you just completed week 63 of meeting with them. What kind of work are you doing here, and what have you learned from them?
Well, so this is, it's been really my privilege to work with the Association for the Advancement of International Education, AAIE, and that's the organization that has been running these Zoom sessions. When we started back in March of 2020, I think we were having about 150 people every week coming on, just trying to just ask, what do I do? What are you doing? How are we doing this? And it's been, I'd say the sessions have been 70% problem solving and 30% therapy, more than anything else. It's just people coming together and realizing and just being reminded that they're not alone, that Other people are suffering and are challenged by this moment as well. But I'll tell you, so this morning, like you said, was week 63. And the problems just keep coming. I mean, it's just amazing. So in Brazil right now, in places in South America, there are heads who are just faced with this onslaught again of COVID, and the numbers are rising and whatever else. And so there are teachers, many places now, teachers have been vaccinated. But now what do you do when a teacher who has been vaccinated all of a sudden tests positive for COVID? And that's happening in places. There's lots of places now where you're fully vaccinated, but you can still test positive for it. Do you send everybody home that's been in contact with that teacher? Do you look for guidance from the CDC that says people who've been vaccinated but test positive really don't shed the virus very much, and it's okay to stay in close? I mean, what do you do? And so it's like every week there are these new contingencies, these new problems that are cropping up, and they're mostly pandemic related, but there are other things, parents, and it's been fascinating. And I have learned so much about what's happening in so many different places in the world. And it has been, as again, exhausting as it has been profound for many of these people who have created a very deep and strong sense of community, where they they trust one another, they share with one another in ways that are marvelous. Really, I think that's the appropriate word. You marvel at how honest and how trusting they are with one another, because they realize they simply cannot do this alone. And by the way, some of these schools are really out in like Estonia, in a small village somewhere, or in Sierra Leone, or all across the world, and they don't have anybody that they can really connect with and do this problem solving. So it has shown them, I think, the absolute potential of these types of environments to learn and to build community and to do good work in the world.
Yeah, I love it. You build a community of trust, and this is one thing that's very powerful about digital literacy. It does allow us to connect wherever we are, regardless of location or economic background. If we've got access to broadband, we can really connect with each other. So you have a motto, it's from survive to thrive in 2021, and you've created a process, a series of audit activities and questions towards a new normal. I picked out the three that I've heard you speaking about over and over again. We at LinkedIn have a kind of a different way of talking about them. Who is unheard? That would be for us. The diversity, inclusion, belonging, well-being, are we okay? And are we connected? We would call that working collaboratively. And I'm putting that out there because those are top 3 visions for a company like LinkedIn, and should be a top 3 vision for any university or college. And then what's more important here, you have these questions, but you actually have a way to address these questions, which is pay attention, listen deeply, include authentically, reflect thoughtfully, and then you have this requirement of radical candor. So I wanted to again put out that Will's website has many, many resources for educators and places to start there. You can have these conversations and set up your own community. He's got this free ebook. And if you feel like we're covering a lot today, we are, but you can get a deep dive free ebook with the 9 big questions schools must answer to avoid going back to normal, going back to our not disrupted enough. It's filled with concrete ideas for creating a school community that can thrive in an increasingly chaotic, uncertain world. Will's new ebook, and I downloaded my copy, will help you build a solid foundation to explore what your school or cohort must become as we move into the future. So we're not leaving you without resources today. And then, as mentioned earlier, Will is co-founder of the Big Questions Institute. And I thought you might want to explain what the goals or objectives are and what tools and dispositions that you have available for educators.
Well, it's bigquestions.institute. That's the website. And basically you can you can see there on the slide, the free ebook. We have events, and we also have a 5 workshop series that we're running this summer with people who are disruptors and who are looking at schools in a different way. And there's that slide as well. So yeah, feel free to check that stuff out. We are trying to be explorers more than anything else. And our definition of explorer is someone who keeps asking big questions, fearless questions, who keeps wondering what's in there, why are we doing this, like what's around the corner. We really believe that learning happens through inquiry, and so we don't suggest that we have answers to those questions you just showed on that screen, but we believe that taken as a whole, those 9 questions get us to a pretty interesting foundation that really takes us back to why we do this work, and to what we need in order to do this work well for the children that we serve. And that in this moment of chaos and complexity and upheaval, there's no better time to get back to that foundation and really get rooted in what's important. So that's the work, right? And once we get to that point, then we begin to build out, but we make every decision or the decisions that we make, then we map back to our answers to those questions. I mean, is this something that is sacred? Is this something that contributes to our wellness? Is this something where we're really giving kids power and agency over the work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we see our work as provocateurs more than anything else, and also coaches to help schools through the process of doing this reset so that then they can reinvent at some point when they're ready to do that.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for telling us we should be fearless about asking our questions as we go into the new normal. So Anna, let's open it up to the questions and answers, and I'll let you sort of take over and ask Will what people have on their mind.
Sounds good. And thank you everybody for being so engaged in the chat. I'll pull the first couple of questions here from the Q&A. So Howard was curious, how would someone with a disruptive set of learning tools gain awareness for these tools within the broader learning community?
So I'm trying to find that question so that I can take a look at it. Can you read that again? Howard, read it again, please.
Sure. How would someone with a disruptive set of learning tools gain awareness for these tools within the broader learning community?
So, I mean, if that question is about how do we connect to other people who are disrupting, which I think that's what the question is. There are lots of places out there now where educators who are explorers and exploring are coming together. I mean, we've started a community at the Big Questions Institute that has about 1,100 people from around the world. But we're not the only ones. Education Reimagined has a community that's pretty provocative and has some great examples of disruptive ways of thinking about classrooms and schools. And I think that it's about getting networked into those spaces right now. There is a growing conversation about change in schools. I don't know how long it will take before change actually happens at scale. I think it's going to be quite a while still. But I do think that small changes are already happening in lots of ways, and that's a good thing. So how we can connect to those folks and how we can build a critical mass of people of voice around those types of changes, I think is really important, and they're out there if you dig around a little bit. Hopefully that answered that question.
Any more questions?
Yes, it looks like we have 2 more. The first one, Paul was curious, and I apologize if I mispronounced this, but he was curious if you had happened to read Justin Wright's Failure to Disrupt, and if so, what lessons you had carried away from that book.
Yeah, so I know Justin, and I really respect Justin's work a lot. And I think his question in that book is really important. I haven't read the entire book. I've kind of glossed some of the outtakes from it, and I think his thesis is that basically, technology has really not led to a huge amount of change, and I think again, it's in the context of agency. When we put technology into kids' hands, we are expecting them to do school through that technology, and so that's not really a very disruptive tool. But when we look at the ways in which kids use technology on their own outside of school to connect, create, again, to consume and learn, it looks a lot different from what happens in classrooms because of the agency factor. Kids can pursue the interests that they have, and they go find the information that they choose to find and create the curriculum they choose to create. And so, yeah, I think again that it's a matter of understanding the power shift that's happened in the last 20 years when it comes to the technologies that we carry. What do you call it? The challenges with that too. It's not perfect by any stretch, but to understand that this is the way the real world operates right now, and we have to prepare kids for that rather than a world where they're required to pull up the Pythagorean theorem when they're 30 years old, when they're in a situation that they might need it and then they don't remember it. So it's more about just in time versus just in case. But I really respect Justin. I was thinking to him actually just a couple of minutes ago when we were talking about how long this might take. Justin, I think I saw him respond in a survey, said that he thought 30 years from now things would be pretty much the same in schools. So there you go. We'll see if he's right.
Well, I'm kind of afraid that people will just easily go back to their old habits. Myself
they will. Oh, they will.
I mean, it's very hard to get people to want to embrace change. Anna, let's have the last question and then we'll close out the session.
Wonderful. So there was a question. Do you think we will see an increase in unschooling independent learners and or homeschooling?
The short answer to that is yes. I think absolutely. I'm going to probably get the number wrong, but I know that for Black families in the United States, the trend last year for homeschooling, I think, was up 500%. I'm sure some of that will go back into the schools, but I think there'll be lots of kids who will continue to be homeschooled. I think that in some interesting ways, the kind of the emperor's clothes have, whatever that phrase is, or the genie's out of the bottle, whatever metaphor works. But lots of parents have seen the experience of school firsthand in the last 16 months, and they are really struggling with what that experience looks like. Of course, again, there's a equity question here. When you read about parents putting together pods of kids, most of those pods come from affluent families who can hire teachers and who can create kind of a different system. The real challenge is, how do we offer those types of different environments to kids who aren't well off, who come from poverty or come from other circumstances that make that difficult. So again, the fear with that is that it's going to be inequitable, and that the kids who can't opt out are going to be in schools that really can't evolve either. And that's not a great situation either. But like I said, the short answer is I absolutely think that there will be more of that, and I think that will continue. But the vast majority of kids are still going to be in schools.
I agree. I think there's going to be a rise for those families that can adapt to that. And there's going to be, because childcare is such an issue for going back to work for families, we're seeing in this administration that they're defining a new age range for school, which will be from kindergarten through the first 2 years of community college. It's actually expanding the definition of what a minimum education needs to be in the United States. And this will go back to some fundamental infrastructure changes in childcare and the ability for parents to go back to work while they're raising their families. Will, thank you so much. You were so great, so insightful. I want to thank everybody for being attending. We appreciate you being here. This month, we have a lot of LinkedIn instructors and authors speaking on their expertise. We do this every month in case you didn't know about it. So I wanted just to promote that special feature that happens once a month where our authors have short sessions on LinkedIn Live. I also wanted to let you know that we have coming up next in July, Doubling Professional Develop on Your Campus with Doug Samuels, who is at Georgia State University. Doug Samuels, because of the pandemic, doubled the size of his professional development program on the campus of Georgia State University by simply going online and allowing people the flexibility to have choice and to choose what time they did things. We're taking a break in August. Everybody deserves a break. We've been talking about that. Take time to reflect, take time to take care of yourself. You can't Be creative and innovative if you don't eat and sleep. These are important things to do, and we should all as educators take that time on your summer break or whatever breaks you have to do that. And then we're going to kick it off with a great session in the fall in September with Christopher Taylor, who's been working with diverse and inclusive companies and working with career centers on colleges and universities to help students find those companies, because students these days do care about the company they work for, their values, their missions, and whether they're inclusive. So again, let's give Will a great big hand. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure, and I hope I see you all in July and take that break in August and then back in September. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Lori. Appreciate it.